Good morning, everyone. Happy Tuesday morning to you, and welcome back to Morning Musings. My name is Don K. Preston. I am the president of Preterist Research Institute of Ardmore, Oklahoma. And we are looking at the Olivet Discourse and Jesus' statement, this gospel of the kingdom must be preached into all the world as a witness to the nations, then comes the end. As I have shared with you, what that means, very simply, is that the mission of the gospel into all of the world would be completed, and when it was completed, that was to be a sign that the end of the age was imminent, coming soon. What I've shared with you is that the New Testament writers, Paul particularly, and the reason Paul focuses on it particularly is because Paul tells us in Romans 1:5, Romans 1:8, that he, he was chosen to preach the gospel to all of the world. Not only that, in Acts chapter 13, Paul recounts his calling as an apostle and how Christ told him he had been chosen to be a light to the world and a witness to the uttermost parts of the earth. He had been chosen for that. Pardon me. And thus, we would expect Paul to be the focus of the discussion of the completion of that mission. And let's not forget, Paul tells us in 2 Timothy chapter 4 and verse 17 that when he stood before Nero, that was the completion of his mission, that all the Gentiles would hear the gospel. Let me make a real quick note here that is so critically important. It's somewhat foreign to us as Westerners, trained in Greek thought. Paul, as a good Hebrew, thought corporately. He thought in collective terms. In Romans chapter 15, Paul said he had fully preached the gospel into all of the regions surrounding Illyricum and environments thereof. Now look, the record tells us that Paul preached in the major metropolitan areas of those areas. He never went to the outlying regions, but in Hebraic thought, the way Paul thought, and by the way, modern scholars recognize this, men such as Perriman, men such as Tom Holland, others, they recognize that Paul was thinking collectively. For Paul to preach in a metropolitan city, to preach in a capital region, was to preach to that entire country. Because he thought, his vision was, if you preach the gospel in the capital, it will spread to every single region. We just have to acclimate ourselves to the way the New Testament writers thought and spoke and wrote, instead of being so rigidly literalistic and thinking, well, Paul said the gospel had been preached to every creature under heaven. Did Paul preach to every single human being on the globe? That's not within the thought. So with that in mind, when we read Paul saying that the gospel has been preached to every nation under heaven, into all of the earth, to every single creature, then we need to see how Paul thought. Now then, to continue our discussion, the preaching of the gospel, the completion of the mission, would be a sign that the end was near. Over and over, Paul affirms that the gospel had been preached into all of the world. Now, I'm convinced that Paul wrote Hebrews. I know there's a lot of discussion about it. It's not technically a critical point for what I'm about to share, but I think if it's true, it just drives it home even more. In Hebrews, Paul spoke about the age about to come. Now, the age about to come is the Messianic age. It's the New Covenant age. It is the age of Messiah and His New Covenant. And in Colossians chapter 2, Paul says that God did not put the age to come or the age about to come. He uses the Greek word melo in the infinitive, and the Blaster-Brunner Greek grammar of the New Testament says that when melai, with the is used with the infinitive, it indicates imminence. And so here's Paul in Hebrews chapter 2 saying, God has not put the age about to come in subjection to the angels, but to the Son. Here's the age about to come. Well, when would the age to come come? It would come when the old age, the age represented by the temple that the disciples asked about when Jesus predicted its demise, and they said, what shall be the sign of the end of the age? By the way, I'm just simply astounded to read on Facebook lately of people denying the reality of the Mosaic age, denying the reality of the Christian age, denying the reality of the Old Covenant age, denying the reality of the New Covenant age. I mean, you talk about argumentum ad desperatum. This is incredible. You need to go back and see my discussion in our Olivet Discourse studies of the end of the age, of Matthew chapter 24 and 3, and to see what the Jews thought about that, to see what Jesus and the apostles said about that in the New Testament. But here again is the point. Here's Hebrews chapter 2 talking about the age that was about to come. It was imminent. Then, among many, many passages that we could point out in the book of Hebrews, in Hebrews chapter 10, in his extended discussion of the Day of Atonement praxis and its typology and the coming of the high priest out of the most holy place, which, by the way, was rather indicative of judgment. But the writer says, and now, in a very, very little while, he uses the Greek term hoson mikron. Very, very little while. The one who is coming. Well, who's the one that was coming? None other than Jesus, who would appear a second time apart from sin for salvation to those who eagerly look for Him. See, there's a statement of imminence right now. To those who eagerly look for Him. Because the Greek word that is used there means an eager expectation. So here is the one who is coming. And the writer says, and now in a very, very little while, the one who is coming will come and will not tarry. Listen, folks. The traditional view of eschatology says Jesus has now tarried for 2,000 years. I don't care how you slice it or dice it, that is a delay. And this old argument, one day is with the Lord 1,000 years, and 1,000 years is as a day, simply will not fly. Peter was not saying you don't have to pay attention to God's time statements. His very statement in the text is God is faithful. Well, if God is faithful, then when He says something is near, guess what? It's near. When He said, in a very, very little while, the one who's coming will come, will not tarry, will not delay, then that meant there would be no more delay. And let me remind you that right there in that context, Hebrews chapter 10, 33 and following, the writer quotes from Deuteronomy chapter 32 twice, And Deuteronomy 32 is about Israel's last days. Israel's last days. And in Israel's last days, the Lord will judge his people. Vengeance is mine, says the Lord. And Deuteronomy 32, 35 and following says that in Israel's last days, when Israel's last days arrived, that judgment would be very near. So here's the writer of Hebrews talking about the very soon coming of Jesus, quoting Deuteronomy 32, 32 to 35, and saying that judgment foretold in Deuteronomy 32 for Israel's last days was coming in a very, very little while. Hey, look, how much more proof do we need, really? Let me say this again. It is only because of a preconceived idea, woodenly literalistic concept, and a misguided concept of the end of the age that causes anyone to seek to mitigate and negate, to evade the force of, and now in a very, very little while, the one who is coming will come and will not tarry. I discuss all of that and more in my book, Into All the World. Then comes the end, and the elements shall melt with fervent heat. Hey, look, here we are, almost at the end of July 2019. You better take advantage, before the offer is withdrawn, of our two-book special. Into All the World, Then Comes the End, the elements shall melt with fervent heat, regularly right at $41. For this month, I can't offer this to overseas orders, I'm sorry, but for the month of July, $30 delivered to your door. Go to my website, donkpreston.com, bibleprophecy.com. There's a banner right up at the top. All you got to do is click it and follow the instructions, and you'll order these two books. I'm telling you what, folks, the evidence here is astoundingly clear and undeniable. Hey, look, we've got more on this, so I'll see you on the flip side.